Thank you, Andreas. This has got to be a little bit of what it feels like to be a rock star. With stuff like this going on, that's why I say, Hola Puebla! Thanks very much for inviting me. Buenos dias, muchas gracias. I have a difficult task today to talk about the theory of evolution in 21 minutes, so I'm going to have to speak very quickly. We evolutionary biologists are always accused of being meanies, nasty people who are trying to take people's religion away from them and replace it with scientific materialism. And I'm going to try to give a sort of happier, more optimistic viewpoint of evolution today, talking about the evidence for why scientists believe that it's true, which is really neat evidence, and I hope will convince some of you, if you're on the fence, that evolution is indeed true. I don't want to engage in a lot of bashing of religion or Christianity. I'll leave a lot of that to the end, actually. I want to sort of give you the positive viewpoint, because some of the evidence for evolution is really quite amazing. And not only is it amazing, but it's multifarious. It comes from many, many areas of biology, not just the fossil record. So I'm going to hope to convince you in the course of these 20 minutes that evolution is indeed true. Now, I have to talk a little bit about why I'm giving a lecture on a theory which was proven true 150 years ago by Darwin. That was evolution 1.0. This is re-evolution. And that's because there's a tremendous amount of opposition to this theory in the United States in particular, but also in many countries. This is a graph which shows 34 technically advanced countries, their acceptance of evolution. The length of the bars tells you how much it's accepted. If it's blue, Darwin's okay. If it's yellow, not quite sure. Red, no Darwin. Okay, so here's the countries, and at the top you see countries like Iceland, Denmark, Sweden, France, Belgium. Lots of people accept evolution. So where's the United States? I don't have Mexico in this graph. Well, there's the US. We're number 33 out of the 34 countries in accepting evolution, about 40%, right above Turkey, which is somewhat of a fundamentalist Muslim country. So this is the problem, and this is the reason why I wrote this book, which I'm going to summarize very briefly today in 20 minutes, Why Evolution is True. I'm hoping that a lot of that resistance to evolution comes from simply an ignorance of the facts and of the mountain of evidence that supports this theory. Now, in order to tell you why evolution is true, I have to tell you, first of all, what scientists think, what we mean by the word true. I have to describe to you what the theory of evolution really is, and what a theory is, and why that theory is also a fact, i.e., the theory of evolution is a truth. That's a lot to chew on for 20 minutes, so I'm going to speak very quickly, and I hope you can follow me. Okay. First of all, what do we mean by a scientific truth? What do we call a fact in science? And I'm going to adopt Stephen Jay Gould's definition here, which is simply a scientific fact that is an assertion for which there is so much evidence that you would have to be perverse not to believe it. Either perverse or brain dead or willfully ignorant or blinded by some other ideology. Okay? So this is what we mean by true. It's not an eternal truth that can never be overturned. It's a truth in which most people that are acquainted with how to judge these things agree. Okay? And things that are true in science but are also called theories are atoms and disease-causing bacteria. We have the theory of atoms and the theory of germs. Those are both theories, but they're also facts. And also the theory of evolution, which falls along with these other two theories as something that's classified as a scientific theory formally, but is also a scientific fact. So a theory in science is not just a wild guess or a speculation. I'll have to read this myself. It's a coherent group of propositions meant to explain something about the real world. A theory is not just a speculation like the Chicago Cubs are going to win the World Series. That's never going to happen. It's a wishful thought. A theory is something of which we have real good evidence is something that might be true and is certainly worthy of scientific test. What happens in the process of science is that we test those theories. They make predictions and we test them over and over again by looking to nature, inquiring with nature, and looking at data. And if you do that over and over and over again, and you find that the theory is confirmed repeatedly, then it gradually attains the status of fact. Okay, so there's no real fundamental difference between a theory and a fact. A theory becomes a fact as more and more evidence is adduced to support it, and you don't find any evidence to refute it. So in this sense, we can say that the theory of atoms is a fact, The theory of germs is a fact. We know that bacteria cause disease, and we know that atoms are constituents of matter. And in the same way, we know that evolution is a fact. It's a theory and a fact at the same time. But first I want to tell you what the theory of evolution is, so I can tell you how we know that it's a fact. And the theory of evolution is more than just one part. It's actually a series of 5 different propositions which are somewhat independent from one another. And these are the propositions. First of all, evolution happens. Populations change over time. Change, gradual change, genetic change is evolution. Proposition 1. Proposition 2 is that change usually happens slowly or gradually. It's not overnight, it's not in 5 years or 10 years. It takes thousands of millions of years for that change to occur. That's a different proposition. It could be that evolution happens, but that it happens instantaneously. But the second part of modern evolutionary theory is that it doesn't, it's gradual. Third, that there is this process of splitting of lineages. That is, a lineage doesn't just change, but it can divide into more lineages. And this happens over and over again over the history of life, resulting in the 50 to 100 million species that we have on Earth today. Proposition 4, that if you look backwards from the splitting event, you see that things trace back to common ancestors. So this is sort of the reverse side of number 3. Every pair of species on Earth has a common ancestor that lived sometime in the past. Okay, that's sort of another way of looking at number 3. And this sort of tracing back of extant species to common ancestors leads to the well-known branching tree of life. Here's the tree for primates, and you can see that any pair of primates has a common ancestor. We're related to chimpanzees about 7 million years ago. For lemurs, it's a lot further, probably something like 30 to 40 million years ago. And finally, the last part of evolutionary theory is this, that much of the change over the course of evolutionary time has been caused by natural selection, the process of so-called survival of the fittest. Okay. So you can see that evolution is not just one thing. It's a theory that's made up of 5 parts. And when you're testing a theory of evolution, you must test each of those parts separately. We have to look for change, we have to look for splitting, we have to look for gradualism, and we have to look for natural selection. And only if all of those are confirmed do we say that the theory of evolution is true. Now I'm going to show you that indeed all of those parts have been confirmed, resulting in the fact that we have no doubt that evolution has the status of atoms and bacteria. It's true, okay? So now I'm going to run through the evidence. A lot of this is detailed in my book, so if you want to see it in more detail, it's available, and I think it's being translated into Spanish. Okay. So like all good scientific theories, evolution makes predictions. Any good scientific theory has to be tested by looking at nature. Evolution is no different. It makes predictions about what you should see if it were true. The most obvious prediction is if life started on Earth as a simple form, as Darwin predicted, then the earliest forms of life that you should see in the fossil record will be simple ones, because you have to start simple, and only later do you get the evolution of more complex forms of life. Okay? So what do you see when you look at the fossil record? Exactly that. If you dig down to about 3.5 billion years ago when life started, you find that the very first organisms are very simple ones. This is the first fossil ever known. This is a blue-green algae, or stromatolite, found in Australia about 3.4 billion years ago. And as you go up further towards more and more recent layers of the fossils, you find more and more complex forms of life occurring: fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and so on. The simple forms stay there, but then more complex forms can evolve also from simpler ancestors. So this first very simple prediction is verified, and in fact this was verified in Darwin's time. Here's another prediction. If evolution occurred within lineages, and then those lineages split and divide, as they must have to produce millions of species from a single ancestor, then you should be able to see that in the fossil record. You should be able to see not only the change, but things dividing up over time. I can't go into all the details of this because there's thousands and thousands of examples. So here's a very familiar one. This is the evolution of the horse. And if you look at the horse fossil record, which starts in North America, you can see exactly this, that some lineages will change over time. In particular, the one lineage on the left that leads to modern horses. Horses started off like that. They had 5 toes. They lost their toes, and they wind up with a single toe. And they also got larger and had bigger teeth. But then there's also all this branching going on in the fossil record. Not all the horses get bigger. Some get smaller. Some get different size hooves and teeth. So we see here just this one example of a process of change over time, which is predicted by evolution, as well as the splitting event. And you can see all those splits on the family tree. And again, I could go on for hours about this, but I'm constrained by time. Okay? Here's another prediction. If creatures share common ancestry, we should be able to go back into the fossil record and find common ancestors of things that are different groups today. The most famous example, of course, is humans and our ape-like ancestors. We are apes, but our ancestors like chimpanzees and gorillas. That's constantly being verified by finding common ancestors like Ardipithecus a couple of weeks ago. Here's a very good example. In Darwin's time, and before we had many fossils, physiologists predicted from the basis of the structure of birds and reptiles, the way their hearts are constructed, etc., that they had a common ancestor sometime in the past. This would lead to the prediction that perhaps we could find evidence for that common ancestry. We might not be able to find that single one species that gave rise to all birds and all reptiles, but we should surely be able to find some transitional forms between birds and reptiles. That is, things that were reptiles but are transforming themselves into birds. And here's one of them. This is a very famous fossil, Sinornithosaurus millenniae, found about 125 million years ago. If you look at that thing, it looks pretty much like a dinosaur. Okay? It has teeth. It has unfused hands. Birds have fused fingers. And it has a long, bony tail. Okay? So it looks pretty much like a reptile. But lo and behold, because of the fine preservation here, you see it has feathers as well. So what we have here is a dinosaur with feathers, which is exactly what you predict if birds evolved from reptiles. It also appears at precisely the right time in the fossil record, about 125 million years ago, after there were already dinosaurs, but before we have modern birds. This thing probably looked pretty much like that. We don't think it could fly. We think the feathers were there to control the heat in the dinosaurs. But anyway, this is a remarkable verification of a prediction that was made hundreds of years ago. We also have evolution and retrodictions. That is, not only can we predict things, but things can appear in nature that we can only understand post facto as results of evolution. Here's a very famous example. This is the coat of hair of human fetuses, which is called the lanugo. You all had one of these when you were a baby, about 6 months old in the womb. It's a coat of hair. It disappears very quickly before you're born. Sometimes it's retained in premature infants like this one, but it always goes away. Now, you have to ask, how does this make sense under a creationist hypothesis? Why would a creator give us hair when we're in the womb and we don't need it because it's nice and warm in there, and then take it away? Well, if you look at chimpanzees and gorillas, they also develop that coat of hair in the womb, but they do not shed it. Okay, they don't get rid of it. It grows up into the adult coat of hair. This can only be understood as an evolutionary remnant of the time when our ancestors were covered with hair. It cannot be understood in any other way. If you've seen whale skeletons in the museums, you will see very frequently that if you look in the rear, we have these 2 bones hanging down from the tail. Those are the remnants of the rear legs that whales used to have, because we know from fossil evidence that whales evolved from 4-legged animals, much like hippopotamuses. Okay? This can only be understood as a vestigial characteristic of evolution. These bones have no function whatsoever. They're there, and they testify to evolution. In fact, sometimes, very rarely, they'll grow up into full legs. These are the bones, those bones of a humpback whale that actually develop further into things that look remarkably like legs. We see a femur, a tibia, and a tarsal. These things are like that long. So occasionally, these tiny bones will re-express themselves as legs. How else can you understand this except by evolution? Biogeography is another way in which we can understand patterns through evolution. I can't go into this in detail, but one of the remarkable observations is that if you look at fossils on Earth, and then you look where on Earth you find species that are the most similar to those fossils, they almost invariably occur in the same place. So here's a glyptodon at the top. This is a large armored mammal of South America, about the size of a Volkswagen, weighed 2 tons, long spiky tail. It's extinct. It went extinct 10 million years ago. But there are things that look sort of like it today, like the armadillo. Well, where do you find them? South America. What's the conclusion? The armadillo must be a descendant of the glyptodon. And you find this pattern over and over again. Besides vestigial organs like the whale's pelvis, we also have vestigial genes. Here's a human embryo at the age of 4 weeks. Okay? One thing you might notice is it has a yolk sac, like chickens do, or reptiles. But this yolk sac is empty. It contains no yolk. It doesn't do anything. It's an evolutionary remnant of the time when we were reptiles. We still have some of the genes for being reptiles in us. And in fact, if you look at the DNA or the genome of animals, you will see that, you will see that we have the genes for making egg yolk in our bodies, but they're dead. They're non-functional. They've been inactivated by mutations. What other conclusion can you lead than that our ancestors had yolk sacs and yolks just like reptiles and birds? Okay. And we have many, many dead genes that testify to evolution. There's lots of examples of bad design, which you predict from evolution, because evolution builds on top of each other. Okay? It doesn't create de novo. It builds on what was already there. And when that happens, then you expect some cases of human designs that aren't perfect. And here's, for an aging male, this is the sine qua non of a bad design. This is the prostate gland, which is basically an organ surrounding a collapsible tube, which is the urethra. Now, this is really bad design because as you get older, and many of you of a certain age may recognize this, the prostate gland swells and squeezes that tube. Now, that's a really bad design. No engineer in the world would put an organ prone to swelling around a collapsible tube. Okay? It's just bad design. The reason it's there is because the prostate gland evolved from the walls of the urethra. So it's explained by evolution, but not by creation or intelligent design. And it hurts. Okay. Finally, we should be able to find evidence for natural selection, because natural selection is the fifth part of evolution. There's lots and lots of evidence for selection in the wild. I won't go into it, but there's at least 300 cases known of natural selection where we can actually see organisms changing over time by selection. A lot of them is published in this book by John Endler. And the most famous case, which is publicized in this book, The Beak of the Finch by Jonathan Weiner, is the change in the beak size of the Darwin's finch. The beaks got bigger when there was a drought and the seeds got harder. And this happened in only 1 or 2 years. So this is only one of a million cases of evolutionary change. So we have evidence from the fossil record, we have evidence from vestigial organs, we have evidence from embryology, we have evidence from bad design, we have evidence from biogeography, we have examples of natural selection. This is enough to show you that all 5 parts of evolutionary theory are true. And when you have all this evidence, I've only given 20 minutes, I could talk for 3 days on this, then you have to conclude that evolution is true. Not only that, but there are things that we could have seen that would show that evolution was false. Here's a list of things I've made that if we had observed any of this, we would know that evolution was wrong. I'll just list the first one. We should see fossils in the wrong place. We should see mammals, for example, 500 million years ago. We might see early blue-green bacteria now, etc. And if any of these observations were made, Darwinism would be shown to be wrong. But fortunately, none of them have. And so, again, Darwin has been shown to be true. So despite a million chances for evolution to be wrong, due to the labors of scientists looking at many aspects of biology throughout the world, it always comes up right. And that's as close as a scientific truth as anybody can get. So that's basically the evidence, but beyond that, I want to talk a little bit about, well, if we have all this evidence for evolution, if it's so overwhelming, why is the United States still down at the very bottom? Okay? And this is, now I'm talking not about science, but about my own ideas. I think it's because of religion. There is definitely a correlation amongst these different countries between how religious they are and how much they accept evolution. And on this next graph, I've drawn a graph of the correlation between how religious a country is, which is on the x-axis, and how much it accepts evolution on the vertical axis. And you can see that the countries that are more accepting of evolution are the ones that are less religious. So there's this definite correlation. And you can speculate about why this is. For example, that if you learn about evolution, you reject God. I don't think that's the right answer. I think the right answer is that countries that are more religious simply reject the idea of evolution because it goes contrary to their religious beliefs. And that's substantiated by theories and sociological studies showing that if people are presented with a fact about science that contradicts their religious belief, 2 times out of 3, they will throw away the science and take the religious belief. So this supports this. There's the United States, pathetically low in evolution, but high in religiosity. So you might conclude from this, if we want to teach evolution, maybe all the stuff that I've just told you for 20 minutes is wrong. That what we really need to do is to loosen the hold of religion on America, because it's actually religion that prevents people from accepting evolution. So let's get rid of religion. I mean, this is my message. I'm not going to try to sell it to you. You could look at my website if you want to see me harangue about that. But actually, the answer is not that simple, because religion itself is correlated with socioeconomic qualities of countries. Here's a graph on the y-axis of what we call a healthy nation status. That is, those countries that are considered healthy because they have good health care, they have low suicides, low drug use, etc. They're considered socially good countries. And on the x-axis, we have how many people believe in God. And you see there's a very strong correlation. Those healthier societies don't believe in God as much. And I think the reason for that is, this is only speculation, that if you feel taken care of by your nation, if you feel secure and happy and not worried about being sick or being killed or taking drugs, then you don't necessarily need to believe in a God. So maybe in the end, and this is my last slide, that's the United States again, way down in the low. Maybe in the end, the way to teach evolution is not to do it directly like I've done, but to help us build a healthier, secular societies that take care of their inhabitants. And that's a goal that not only people like I can do, but people like you can do. So thank you very much. That's the end. And